就好似生命冇咗水一樣，生存唔到。
做生意首先要諗自己覺得過唔過癮先，冇科技係永遠都唔會有創新嘅。
Dream it possible， 唔好俾自己有框框，早啲同銀行傾你個計劃，你會早啲完成你嗰個目標。
即上恒生商業銀行 YouTube 頻道睇足本分享，實踐創業夢，將不可能變可能。恒生最新商業戶口最快3天開戶，全程網上辦妥，立即上網或致電查詢啦。
Entrepreneur Day 2021. During the 3 days event, simultaneous interpretation services in English, Cantonese, and Mandarin will be provided. You may select the audio channel next to the video frame, and you are also welcome to raise questions through the Q&A box. Selected questions will be asked at the Q&A section towards the end. So, without further ado, the section Culture as a Service, the new segmented ushered in the home office work will now begin. Please welcome our first speaker of the first section, Ms. Jessica Walsh, co-founder and CEO of Remote Social. Hi, Jessica. Could you hear us clearly?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect. So the stage is all yours now.
Wonderful. Well, firstly, I just want to say thank you so much for having me. I lived in Hong Kong for 6 years before we moved home to Australia, and it's a place that's very dear to my heart. And probably in many ways, the experience that I had building a business with a remote team in Hong Kong has led me to where I am today. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak about culture as a service and about the new normal we find ourselves moving into as remote and hybrid work increasingly become the norm for organizations around the world. Remote Social is an early stage technology startup. We're based in Sydney, Australia, and we have 3 co-founders who've worked in diverse organizations from Atlassian to Google to Amnesty International, and in remote and hybrid and global teams, we've all become really passionate about building a product that empowers team leads to build strong cultures in remote and hybrid organizations. Now, I just wanted to set the stage for today by talking about the historic shift that we're witnessing in the way we work. I think what I personally had, as I mentioned before, already experienced working in remote and in hybrid organizations before the pandemic. But I think it's very well acknowledged now that the pandemic has really ushered in a new era of work in which very much employees are telling their employers that they want remote work options to stay. I think some recent stats that have come out said that as many as 73% of employees, and that might even be understating it, want remote work options. And recent stats say that 51% of knowledge workers around the world will be working remotely or hybrid by the end of this year. I think it's important and interesting to juxtapose those statistics with the fact that I'm sure many of you have heard about this term, the Great Resignation. Workers around the world are really considering how they want to work in the future after the pandemic has subsided.
Hi, Jessica. Sorry to interrupt. Hi. Can you also share your PowerPoint slides to us so we can have a better picture of your presentation?
Yes.
Perfect.
Can you see that? Yes, perfect. So
yeah.
Great. Sorry about that. Not sure what happened there. So look, I think the point that I was making is that we're witnessing an historic shift in the way we work. And I think this term, the Great Resignation, which is really employees voting with their feet with the way that they want to work moving forward. And so what that, I think for any organization who is considering mandating bringing their knowledge workforce back into the office 5 days a week, I think now's the time to really sit down and have a look and have a look at what your competitors are offering, and to ask your employers about how they're going to work. Because I think increasingly, unless employers are offering their people the opportunity to work flexibly, it's going to be incredibly difficult for them to stay competitive in the longer term. And what that means, I think, for organizations is that engagement is more important than ever. There's not an organization around the world that can afford to have, 41% of their teams considering leaving. And so organizations increasingly need to think about how they engage their employees in new and interesting ways. Teams still need ways to build connection, even if they're not sitting together day to day. And the past ways that they had of connecting and of building that culture in remote and in office environments are no longer working. We've spoken to hundreds upon hundreds of businesses all around the world, many of whom are using our products now. And the common thread is that team leads are struggling to manage culture in the distributed future of work, and that everyone is still working out exactly what the right mix will be for their teams as they move into the future of work. So I guess that brings us to like some of the commentary that we're getting from managers and HR leaders. They're talking about the energy that they've lost for engaging their employees, about the fact that managers don't know how to connect with their teams, and about how culture activities have become really reactive and ad hoc. It's just not enough to have a Slack channel or a social channel in Teams and to hope for the best. As work becomes remote and hybrid and that normalizes, team leads increasingly need purpose-built tools to support their people to build really strong cultures. So what is culture as a service? That's a question that I have been asked quite a few times. And I think going back to the fact that organizations are still working out exactly how they're going to be managing their people and their workforces moving forward. For some organizations, hybrid work means that they're mandating people go into the office a couple of days a week on a rotating schedule. And at the other end of the spectrum, we have people who, organizations who are saying you can come into the office once a year, and that will be all the face time that's required. I think across wherever you sit on that spectrum, there's a really strong requirement for a product layer that supports the social interactions that you would previously have had in an office environment. So we're talking about social moments where sharing happens and the important foundations that lays for context and for information flows through an organization. And it's really, really important for organizations and for managers to be deliberate about that. And the reason that that's important is that being part of a team is about so much more than just the work. Of course, the work is very important, and of course, we all need to be productive, and that's our primary purpose for being there. But increasingly, people are looking beyond compensation as the only or even the primary measure by which they make their career decisions. People want to feel values and mission aligned with their organizations. And we're now seeing cohorts of people who are coming into a role and going through entire employee life cycles without ever having met a single person that they work with. So it's really important for managers and for organizations to be deliberate about engagement. For us, engagement starts at the hiring process and it goes all the way through the employee life cycle. Managers just cannot rely on the historic in-office cultures that they once had prior to the pandemic. And so what we're seeing now is the carving out of new ways for teams to connect and to build culture and relationships that ultimately are very important to supporting productivity and to supporting the bottom line. So Remote Social itself is an all-in-one platform that helps team leaders in distributed organizations to plan, run and measure social and culture programs. Essentially, what our whole purpose for being is to help team leads simplify the opportunity creation for their teams to have fun and to strengthen relationships. We provide a range of different activities to help enable and to reinforce positive team cultures for distributed teams. And these are really crucial in our view to opening up trust and lines of communication and to achieving those objectives of making sure that teams feel connected to one another, connected to their organizations, and towards achieving the same goals as an organization and as a team. As I mentioned at the start of the presentation, we're an early stage business. So we started in 2020, bringing all of our expertise, having worked in leading remote and global organizations, to starting to build out a platform. And we started with a single bingo game, and we used that as a tool to have conversations with organizations. Since then, we're now in open beta phase. We have a platform which has 7 games live. We have a Slack integration, which allows for asynchronous sharing. And we have over 100 hosted experiences that are live on our platform. So we have teams from over 35 countries now using the product. And we really see that as just a small down payment on our ultimate culture as a service vision, which is to own the end-to-end social touch points across the entire life cycle of the team. So that doesn't mean that we're entering into the HRIS space or the survey tool space, but very much leaning into the culture and the social moments. We think of culture as a stack, and that we believe that managers in remote and hybrid teams need a variety of tools at their fingertips to keep their people engaged and to keep those social moments happening. Right now, as of today, we make it super easy for team leaders in distributed teams to manage their social and culture programs by access to our ever-growing catalogue of team activities, by making it super easy to plan, organize, and run those activities, and also to measure, track, and gather actionable insights and recommendations, as well as requests from their teams. In a kind of day-to-day sense, I can give you an idea of what this looks like. We have a team alignment tool that is recommended to be run fortnightly. So this is a calendar view that I'm showing here, as well as a range of different icebreakers and games that teams can either choose to run as specific social sessions. So you might run a social game once a week, or you might choose to interject these icebreakers and games within existing meetings. And we are finding that is incredibly effective for teams, is rather than creating a huge range of additional events in their team's calendars, is to find ways that work for your team and to build those moments into the calendar and into the working week, so that it feels natural and so that it feels part of the day-to-day workflows. The other thing that we can offer there is also the hosted experience side. And so really, as we think about that culture stack, it's providing a range of different opportunities and tools for people to connect. Some of them being very light touch points that just provide a moment for social sharing, and others being much more in depth. I think it is also probably worth calling out some of the key trends, just to recap some of the things that I've already spoken about here. The workplace dynamic has fundamentally changed over the last 2 years. We already saw some trends towards remote and hybrid work, but the pandemic has supercharged that. And employees, as I said earlier, are voting with their feet. Location flexibility is going to be table stakes moving forward into the future of work. And I think the next evolution of that, beyond just location flexibility, will be hour flexibility. So I think we'll be increasingly moving towards output-driven organizations and output-driven outcomes, rather than it being all about being in the office in front of your boss from 9 to 5. It's really going to be about the quality of work that you can produce as an individual and as a team, regardless of where you're sitting or the hours that you're logged on. I think an output of that is that asynchronous is going to become increasingly important within organizations that are distributed, which will mean that organizations need to think more about how they document their workflows, about how they enable their people to build strong relationships, even if they're not online at the same time. And I also wanted to share some of the top tips for leaders. I think really intentionality is the key word here. It's incredibly important for managers who, may be struggling with building strong relationships in teams to be very intentional, to spend time to understand what their teams need and to understand what the status quo is, to understand what motivates their teams and how their teams like to work, And also to show that building relationships and culture is important within your organization, because if it's not valued by you as a leader, it's unlikely that it would be valued by your team. So by being intentional, by planning ahead and making sure that you have the calendar in place and the budgets in place, you will signal to your team how important those relationships are. And I think that goes for budget as well. In order to maximize return on investment on culture activities, it's incredibly important to plan ahead and to allocate those budgets for culture activities so that you can show your teams that you are indeed leading by example. So those are some of the trends that we're seeing in the culture as a service space and some of my top tips. I am Jessica, and thank you very much for the opportunity to chat to you today. Remote Social's mission is to remove geography as a barrier to connection on distributed teams. And I just wanted to finish up by once again thanking you, and to say that if anyone wants to jump on to Remote Social to have a play around with our platform or to connect with me, you can jump on our website here, and I'm more than open to connecting on LinkedIn. I always love chatting to other founders about the work that they're doing. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jessica, for your insightful sharing on how we can ensure social interactions and engagement still works perfectly in the pandemic era. And I'm very excited to see enterprises adopting some of your tools in the future. So next up, we'll have Mr. Yeung Shing, co-founder of Quokka HR. So hi, Yeung, can you hear us clearly?
Hello.
Hello. Perfect, so the time is all yours.
Okay, yeah, so again, thank you for HKTDC for this opportunity. So my name is Yeung. I'm the co-founder of Quokka HR. We are a SaaS people management platform in Hong Kong. So we're also quite an early stage startup. So we specialize in sort of people management. Again, because of the pandemic, we are seeing a sort of paradigm shift. So, there's a lot of talk about the new normal, about hybrid work. So, so I'm here, I'm going to talk about a bit of how to build a workplace culture in the hybrid world. So let me try to share my setting. Share my screen. Can you guys see my screen?
Not quite yet. Okay, cool.
You guys see my screen?
Works perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, so just a bit of introduction about our company. So, we're a cloud-based people management platform. So, our vision is to help organizations attract, retain, and engage a talent, even in the remote and hybrid work settings. So our product has different module. We have a performance module, we have an engagement module, and we have a recognition module. So it's all like a one-stop shop digital platform that can help people manage their entire employee experience. So let's talk about what's changed, right? So today's world, we all know globalization, right? Even before the pandemic, we're hyper connected. There's so much data around. We're always on, right? So in a sense, it's a very fluid and decentralized world, right? Compared to 20 years ago, right? And the pandemic, right, hit. It actually further accelerated that kind of things, right? Because hybrid work is the new normal. So before I start, right, I'd like to define what's a company culture. So a company culture can be defined as a social order within the organization, right? So it consists of shared value and shared belief, and actually shape the behavior, attitude, and the people of the company, right? So in a sense, culture is what brings people together, right? Usually that's aligned to the mission and aligned to the vision, right? And there are different ways to build a culture, right? And that's why the big topic is what has changed, right, in the pandemic setting. So before the pandemic, most of the companies, most organizations, simply put, they all focus on just getting work done, right? They're getting work done in different ways. But during the pandemic, people actually think they put the focus on the workers, right? Because of some very life pressing issues, depending on industry, right? In Asia, in Hong Kong, I think we're in pretty good shape, but I'm sure in the West, right, there are actually very, certain pressing concern about worker safety, right, about how to put in the right measure. So right now we are almost, coming into the post-pandemic, right, where we choose to kind of co-live with the virus. So this is a great opportunity to think about your culture and to reshape your culture, right? And to start that, the big question is, you need to ask yourself as manager, as leader, do you want to preserve your culture, or are you looking to change, right? So that's one big question that as a leadership team, you need to ask yourself first. So I want to talk about some impact, right? Sharing some impact of the remote work. So first of the impact is obviously just a blending of the personal and professional work, because a lot of them was working from home. We are having Zoom meetings, we're having a lot of remote working. But then the downside is that, sometimes we just don't realize that we just continue working, right? So, the personal life and professional life are kind of blended together. Mental well-being has also become a big topic, at least a bigger topic here in Asia, right? We talked to different, company executive and management, where in fact we just gave a field talk along with Hong Kong Pacific Council a few months ago on mental well-being. Actually, a lot of the business leader actually, they got concerned because it's actually a real pressing issue that happened during the pandemic, right? So a lot of measures in place, they're putting in budget and resource to kind of figure out these kind of things. And the other thing is on the individual level, right? On the employee level, people start to question, at least we did some survey for some of the employees in Hong Kong. That's one of the questions that we asked them, right? Jessica also mentioned about sort of the great resignation kind of topic, right? So people actually start to reflect on themselves, think about, what is the purpose, bigger thought, what's the purpose of life? And in fact, that's linked to what's the purpose of work, right? What does that mean? That means the kind of job that, especially youngster, right? When they seek is that, they increasingly value, the purpose or the mission, of the work, right? More than just a paycheck, right? More than just stabilities, right? And that's one thing. And keeping your people engaged has become a very big challenge, but it's also become a very high agenda for a lot of the managements, right? How do you keep your people remotely engaged, right? Or in the hybrid work kind of settings, right? And the last, the need for digital transformation actually accelerated. It has been ongoing for many, many years, especially, in company enterprises, but because of the pandemic, they actually, accelerated. So what has changed for management, right, under the remote hybrid work? I think one of the biggest ones, just to be very inclusive, is, some of us probably heard of the term called management by walking around, right? So that's a very kind of traditional management science. As a manager, you want to constantly just be there, right? You can't constantly just walk around the office, listen to people, giving instant feedback. And that becomes a challenge during remote work, right? How do I give feedback, right? How do I know whether my people are actually working, right? Do they have problem? Are they actually working? Are they slacking off, right? A lot of suspicions, right? A lot of uneasiness that actually arises, right? So that is actually something that, management talk about, right? And that's something that, people increasingly looking for, different way to adapt to it. So let me just share a couple of things, right? A couple of things that can help company to kind of stay afloat during sort of the hybrid work environment, right? The first and foremost, almost the most important is communication, right? The communication is always there. It becomes even more important, right, in a remote work or the hybrid work. right? You want to keep it very effective, right? Very straightforward. The other point is, you want to set goals and objectives. They're very transparent and also align with the company's mission, right? And that ties into what I just mentioned is that, people these days, they are increasingly questioning, right? What I'm doing, am I actually contributing, to the company's direction? Does it matter what I'm doing, right? So you need to, as manager, you need to think of different kind of methodology, right? You can experiment different kind of methodology. For example, OKR, called Objective Key Result. It's a very popular methodology that's used by a lot of the startup and the tech companies. It was invented by Intel. It's used by Google, Facebook, all the big tech companies. It's actually a very effective methodology that, a company can set a company goal. And if you have department, they can set department goal and they can align to the company goal. And team can set team goal, individual can set individual. They can just align themselves up. And it's completely transparent to the entire organization, right? So everyone knows, what they're doing, and everyone understand the results of their work actually contribute to the overall company mission, right? So we also heavily promote that. That's one of our key module in our platform, to basically have a digital tool to set this goal tracking. The other topic is to increase the flexibility. Right? It's always challenging, right? It's always hard. It's easy to talk about work-life balance, right? But when we actually talk to, I myself working in a bank, I worked in the big company before, even before the pandemic, right? People talk about work-life balance all the time. But I worked in investment banking, right? Work-life balance just didn't exist, okay? No matter how much management talk about, it just never existed, okay? But I think, in terms of, rather than talking about work-life balance, you should talk about flexibility, right? I think that's very important, right? Because, personally, right now I have a family, I have my, little daughter. I think, that's actually something that's concerned. I really appreciate, the flexibility that, sometimes I can take my girl to school, or sometimes I can, join her drama classes and just check out early, right? And we can come back, right? Because of all these digital tools, right? We can just come back to work, anytime, as Jessica mentioned, right? Work, who invented this whole thing about 9 to 5, right? Someone from a couple hundred years ago decided that somehow our world has to stick to this order. I mean, it works very effective, right? But, this is a time that we can reflect to, right? And that kind of tie up to how do you want to measure the productivities, right? Clocking out by hours. I think some job nature requires that, right? If you are sort of on the ground, if you're a technician, if you're in logistics, right? If you're in kind of surface area, you kind of stick to your hours, right? But there are many other type of job nature, you don't really necessarily have to stay in the office, right? So this is something you can also think about, right? As a company. Try to retain the social element of work. Again, Jessica mentioned, you share some very great tips. I think it's very important, and it's very challenging, right? Some of our clients ask us as well, right? I mean, they experiment different things. They experiment, I don't know, having a beer during Zooms. Was it effective? I don't know, right? But there are many different ways to think about. But we do have to try to retain the social element of work, right? Because this is what keep people engaged. The loneliness, people don't underestimate the loneliness from working from home, right? I think Hong Kong is okay. Particularly it's still, when you go out, there's still a lot of people out there, right? And the MTR station is packed people. You don't really feel the impact of the pandemic. But, this thing is, I don't think this thing is going to end anytime soon, right? There's been new variants. Once we open the border, there might be more cases. So we might be switched back to kind of the remote work, right? I think the last, which is most important, is to trust your employees, right? And make their voice heard, right? There's a lot of people's concern, a lot of challenges, right? Even for us, right? We have a remote team. For Quokka, we have a remote team in Southeast Asia. We try to, as startup, we're always very, we're not very hands-on, right? We try to give them a lot of freedom. But there's time we question, are they on, right? What are they doing, right? There's always this this balance between, do I want to implement some kind of surveillance, which we strongly advise against, right? Between, or give them autonomy, right, to try to do their work, right? So there is no right or wrong answer. There is a formula that you want to balance, but then having the trust, it's very, very important, right? If you don't have the trust, there is something wrong, right? Either between the team dynamic or either between maybe it's the fit, that's something you need to jump right into, right, to fix. So I also like to share, again, we talked to, different clients in Hong Kong, in Asia. So some of the agendas during this pandemic period, first of all, obviously COVID, a lot of companies actually, talking about how to transition into a flexible workplace arrangement, whether by even in large company, they think about, reducing office space, they're renting out some co-working space, right? Having some, permanent policy of, having a, working from home, etc. The other interesting thing is about, they talk a lot about skills, right? About upskill and reskill, during the digital era. It'll be surprising because, there are, particularly some of the SMEs, right? They are more kind of traditional type of, business. Some of them are like family run. Some of their staff have been with them for, 20, 30, we've seen like 40 years, right? Which is amazing, right? When a company, but that, the kind of the business owner really, had to think about, how to reskill, upskill them. And oftentimes it's just very simple, right? They're very, not a lot of SME leader, they don't actively use a lot of digital tools. You'll be surprised, they still largely rely on WhatsApp and WeChat on, kind of managing, not just communication, kind of the almost like workflow for the companies, right? They even use that to take attendance, right? So, it's not very effective, obviously. So that's something that's, on top of the agenda, right? And narrowing the job gap, some of the, company, they also mentioned, particularly for, younger people, right? They're looking for a job that's more, more a lot digital, with data, with something more innovative and creative. But the reality is that, the jobs in the market, a lot of them are not these type of jobs, right? Some of them are still kind of, more old school traditional type of jobs. So there's a gap there, right? There's a gap there we're trying to narrow. And that actually brings down to, technology, right? Essentially, we all know that, with AI, with robotic machine learning, will replace all of the jobs. But they, in fact, will also create a lot of new jobs, right? I think the World Economic Forum, as a report, mentioned that, some 97 million new jobs will be created. Right, we've seen that, in history, during the Industrial Revolution, people scared, all this machine will replace people's job, but in fact, that's not the case, right? So again, that kind of, there's a lot of these things actually kind of tying together, right? But at the core, we see that it's the technology, right? I mean, technology it's a sweet spot, right? I mean, technology is something that, you just have to do it, right? I mean, for digital transformation, right? It's always better to start early, right? Because in 10, 20 years, the stack is going to change, right? Or you will have a much harder time, right? Or even you won't have time really to catch up, right? You will be phased out, right? So really kind of start the kind of digital transformation, automate some of the, more repetitive standard works. And so you can free up people's capacity, right? Having them to be, working on something that's more engaging, right? So they can feel that they contributed to the work, to the company's mission, right? One last thing, obviously, employee engagement, retention, how to attract the young talent, right? That's also some of the, a lot of talking points among the HR leaders. That's what we see, during talks. So, that's it. So again, if anyone wants to talk to me, here's my contact. I'm based in Hong Kong. If any of you have interest in, just understanding employee engagement, we offer different kind of services, not just a SaaS platform. We also offer sort of a survey type of type of services that we can help company to launch survey. Again, because the first step you want to sort of try to kind of transform your organization is to get insight, to understand what your people are thinking, right? So, that's kind of first step. So we often, just advise clients to start with kind of building a survey, kind of talk to your people and understand, what's their concern, what's their needs. So maybe I'll hand the time back to the host. We can
Thank you, Yeung, for your insightful sharing. And perhaps his cloud-based people management platform could be something you can start looking into. Okay, so please stay online as we'll now move on to the Q&A section. For our audience viewing online, you are also welcome to raise questions through the Q&A box right next to the video frame. So, hi, Jessica and Yeung. So to start off, let's start with something more generic, okay? So we have a question from the floor. So we've been talking a lot about remote work starting to appear after the pandemic situation. So do you think this trend will continue even after the pandemic?
I can get started. So short answer is yes. That's actually quite consistent across a lot of business leaders. Even until we have a very effective vaccine, right? I think a lot of people actually expect this will, the COVID will kind of exist like a flu type. We'll have, we need to get jab every single year. But even we have, kind of a safety measure, right? People actually realize, right, that remote work is actually not that bad, right? Like productivity doesn't get hit. In fact, we actually measure some positive benefit in the remote work. Again, we actually did a survey with Hong Kong PC a couple months ago. We surveyed, like 1,000 companies in Hong Kong, and the data is that 97% of them think that hybrid work is going to stay, and a lot of them will think about implementing a hybrid work strategy. But then, interestingly, when we survey the employee, very low percentage actually want to fully work remote, right? The most popular opinion is to have a hybrid. So they come to office 2 to 3 days a week, and work from home, 2 days a week, right? So I think that's also quite natural, to be honest, right? It's it's quite consistent thought. So we think it's gonna stay, right? That's why this is not like a one-time thing, right? It is a great opportunity to think about your company's culture, right? To think about reinventing your process, looking into new tools, implementing, kind of new practice, right, to adapt to this.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Yeung has said there. I think that remote work was already starting to be something that was picking up in popularity even before the pandemic. And as I said before, I think that this has supercharged its adoption. I agree that it will be the minority of organizations that will commit to being fully remote. I think that certainly everything that we're hearing from organizations large and small around the world is that they will end up landing somewhere in that hybrid scenario. I think what is really interesting, what we witnessed here in Australia, we had quite a long period where we had zero community transmission here in New South Wales. And we still saw very strong feedback from employees about their views towards returning to the office. So I think for organizations that are thinking that they're going back into the office 5 days a week, that's going to be quite a process. And I think it will end up being the minority of organizations that go back to working the way that they did before.
Right. Thank you, Yeung and Jessica. I think perhaps you guys have mentioned one key issue is that we need to take into different phases and different terms to fully say going into full remote work arrangement. So we have another question from the floor. So is there a magical ratio of remote working and physical working?
I think that that's different for every organization and every employee. And as Yeung said, there are certain types of roles that simply can't be done remotely. But I think for knowledge workers, the magic formula is for employers and employees to engage in a constructive conversation about what works best for both sides.
Yeah, I think from some of the survey data, although it's, you can never be very conclusive on the survey, I think 2 to 3 days, it's kind of, a sweet spot that people look for from working from home. As Jessica said, right, due to job nature, it's not possible to, have a remote work, right? For example, if you are in logistics, right? But then for these kind of companies, but employers should really think about, again, something that I mentioned about flexibility, right? Having the flexibility, right? Think about your shift, right? I mean, it's a lot of shift management, right? How do you cater to, maybe have, 1 more day of work, like day off or something like that, right? So there's no magic formula, but, I think it's important. I think that, the way they want to find out is really just to ask your employees, right? Ask them what they feel that's the most comfortable.
Right. Thank you. So I guess communication could be the first starting point for all companies to kick off this arrangement. So we have another question from the floor. So it's on at your platforms. So what do you think is the biggest challenge for everyone to encourage their staff to start up using some of your platforms in the future?
Well, I mean, our platform is super simple to adopt. I think one of the challenges is that there's quite a lot of overwhelm for people who've been at home working for, in many cases full time for 2 years now. It's about really carving out the right time and space and being intentional about how you ask your employees to spend their time. Obviously, our product is quite different from Quokka in that we're really focused on encouraging employees and teams to embrace those social moments as really important precursors to productivity and ultimate business success. And our definitely all of our messaging is around being intentional about how you ask your employees to do that, and providing those team leads with the tools that they need to do to make those fun moments happen. But we certainly have seen in a lot of organizations, people who are really burnt out by the adoption of so many tools in a digital environment.
So for Quokka, I think our platform has a lot of features, but the easiest way is to book a free trial, right? With a free trial, just try it out. And then I think we work in companies with different sizes. Normally startups who are our most active user, they will adopt the full feature because they just kind of live and breathe the whole digital tools, right? You cannot ask a startup to manually do anything, right? They always try that's in the DNAs, right? I'm sure Jessica will echo that. For larger companies, so one of the strategy is really to try to roll out to a team or the department, right, as pilot users. Our platform is very modularized. Very few of our clients actually use the whole platform. They can pick and choose just one module, with different pricing scheme. We're a SaaS product, very flexible. It's on a monthly basis per user. You can stop anytime. There's no contract binding, no set of fees. So I think just taking the first step, I think you just try it out, which is very challenging. I have to agree, right? I have to admit, especially for a large company, right? Because it's never the technology that's a challenge. It's always the change management, right? The organizational change. But again, this is the opportunity, right? As I mentioned, this is sort of the trigger, right? This whole pandemic is for the company leadership to sit down and say, okay, maybe we should just have do this and this and this, and we should just try it out, right? And people's acceptance level, employees' acceptance level is also very high because they are also kind of in the same boat, right? So this is really a good opportunity to try to revamp your process and try out some new tools out there.
Right, so I guess really trial and error is the key also. Apart from flexibility of communication, how we kick off this like remote work arrangement even after the pandemic era. So we have another question from the floor. So how can we uncover the staff's talents when the time in co-working at remote setting has significantly reduced?
That's a very good question. I can start with that. Again, right, it's actually, there's no right answer. I think the key is to to really think about your methodology of evaluating or reviewing your employees' performance, right? Like how does that tie into better goal tracking, right? Because especially for if you're like a knowledge-based worker, right? Because it's not your performance is really not measured by your hour, your day-to-day, right? Sometimes you'll be working on something that's spent across like a monthly, quarterly. So again, we promote this called OKR methodology. So it's a very simple goal setting methodology. You set the objective, you set different key results that are measurable, and then you have we encourage all the team to have a weekly check-in, at least a weekly check-in, right? Daily check-in will be even better to understand what's the obstacle, what's the challenge, what's the progress. Just a more structured way of measuring productivity, right? And the other thing is how to get your people engaged, right? I think different cohort, different people have different needs, right? We talk about engagement. Engagement is different from job satisfaction, right? And the younger people, they really value jobs a lot different than like older generation, right? They see their career more fluid, right? I even talked to some of my friends who are still working in a big company in banking. When we used to interview, one of the standard interview questions is always, what do you see ourselves in 5 to 10 years, right? And these days people stop asking that, right? Because people are more mobile, right? They kind of expect, people kind of try to change their career, 2 to 3 years, 5 years down the road, right? So that's also something that, you need to think about, right? You need to almost like accept, right? And then we think about sort of, how do you keep your mobility up, right? Keep your people challenged, right? These are all like very important that contribute to kind of the overall performance of your team.
Thank you, Yeung. So next up, actually, we have a question directed to Jessica from the floor. So when work from home is still relatively a new concept in Hong Kong, so there are definitely local company hiring like overseas workers, which makes like remote work or like track of productivity even more hard, right? So are there any particular tips to engage them?
Well, I think, we certainly have our own views on that, and we feel that it's important. I think a lot of the things that Yeung has said about communication and about understanding what motivates your employees, regardless of where they sit, I definitely wholeheartedly agree there. We really think that a strong precursor to productivity and engagement is to create those moments where people can get to know one another. And when you don't have those serendipitous moments in the office, you can't learn by osmosis. You have to be much more intentional about that. And so that's about creating opportunities for people to share, whether that be in a productized way, like you can do on a platform like Remote Social, or your own rituals that you create within the organization. It's really, really important that you provide employees with an opportunity to get to know one another, to feel like they're part of something that's bigger than themselves. And, we as an organization certainly have views that it's really important to structure that into your team's calendars so that they know what's coming, so that they can expect it, so that they understand why it's important, and so that they come to look forward to it. We don't think that there's any one way. And I guess going back to my earlier point about we see culture and engagement as a stack. You need to be thinking about a range of different ways that you can engage people. And that's why we're trying to put those tools at the fingertips of leaders, and more than happy for anyone that wants to get in touch with me for us to sit down and to help us map out something that would be useful to your particular organization or use case.
Right. So I guess that would be one of the key takeaway for all of our audiences online, to see how remote work arrangement could lead forward in the future. So I guess we will come to our last question for the Q&A section. So let's go some way forward. Do you think these services will encourage companies to set up a new international branch in the future?
Yeah, let me start first. I think, again, the short answer is yes, right? So, it's always two-way, right? First of all, again, the first step is that people start to realize that, remote work actually works, right? That's very important. It's an epiphany that, it actually works. And then, again, the world is connected, right? We were globalized, and I can share something that's, particularly it's quite popular in Hong Kong, because in Hong Kong, one of the very common challenge for startup is to hire tech talent, right? Engineering talent are very scarce in Hong Kong. Even we have very smart young people. They, again, the sad reality is, they all choose to go to, bigger company with higher paycheck, more stability. That's changing, but still, right? So actually, a lot of tech startups in Hong Kong are looking for engineer talents, right? And engineering talent the job nature itself is really very fit for remote, right? I mean, they are, so that's something that's quite popular. And the other, sort of factor is due to, cost, right? In fact, you could actually find some, very good talent with lower cost, and cost is very important for startup. So it's bringing it to change, right? So I think, again, it's two-way, right? But even for people here, you can try to look for, opportunities abroad, right? We know there are a lot of particular tech companies, right? They're recruiting around the world, right? Because they're implementing sort of a permanent remote kind of arrangement, they will actually accept candidates from across the world, right? They're very global in thinking, so you can actually reach out, right? So yeah, again, we think this is a really great trend that we're seeing. You're just bringing the world more connected, which is kind of ironic, right? If you think about pandemic, actually lock people in the home, but we feel that, we're quite positive, right? We feel that, post-pandemic, we will actually become more connected.
Well, I just want to say, Yeung, I feel your pain on how difficult it is to hire tech talent. It's the same here in Australia, and actually, I think that that's a global phenomenon, and that the demand for engineers will, is quickly outpacing how quickly people are being trained and gaining expertise. And I think in answer to the question, yes, I agree with Yeung that we're increasingly going to see much more global interconnectedness in teams. Certainly, as we talk to organizations about their planning, there are two models that seem to be coming out. One of those is to have truly decentralized teams where everyone is fully remote. And that means you could have engineers in Argentina, in the United States, in Europe, in Australia. You could have your teams truly distributed and working from anywhere. And the other model is the hub model, where you might have hubs of engineers or hubs of team members in different locations, either within a certain country or in many cases around the world. So rather than having 5 engineers in different countries, you would choose to hire a team of people in one country and a team of people in another country. So those are certainly two of the models that we're seeing our clients and the organizations we're talking to increasingly consider and think about as we move forward.
Right. Thank you so much for your presentation and all the answers. And I'm sure our audience had definitely learned a lot from it. So perhaps on the feasibility of exercising like remote work arrangement, companies and HR can think about it, how to exercise it, and also to revisit the idea of work, perhaps, career, perhaps, and also about the pandemic, whether we are all more interconnected. It's not an obstacle, but opening up more opportunities for all of us. So next up, please feel free to scan the QR code on the screen to send us your feedback and stay connected with our Smart Advisor to explore any possibilities. So you may also click on our next section at the bottom of the website. See you later, and don't forget we still have Smart Biz Expo on the line waiting for you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.